At 35,000 feet, the massive Boeing 777 violently pitched nose down, plunging toward the freezing Atlantic. In the locked cockpit, two dead weights slumped over the controls. 239 souls screamed in the back, but row 34, seat J, held a secret weapon, and she had exactly 60 seconds to wake up. Major Chloe Mitchell hated flying commercial. For a woman who spent the last 8 years strapped to the ejection seat of an F-35, a Lightning II, pulling 9 Gs while breaking the sound barrier, the cramped confines of a Boeing 777-300ER felt like a coffin. She was tucked away in 34J, a window seat in the deepest bowels of economy class on Flight 409 from London to New York. Chloe was in civilian clothes, a faded gray hoodie pulled up over a messy bun, worn jeans, and noise-canceling headphones. Nobody looking at her would guess she was one of the United States Air Force's most decorated combat pilots, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She was on mandatory administrative leave, carrying the invisible weight of a classified close call over the Pacific that had grounded her for the last 4 months. Her hands, resting in her lap, carried a slight tremor that only appeared when she was completely still. Beside her sat Arthur Pendleton, an anxious, balding accountant who had spent the first 2 hours of the flight aggressively gripping his armrests and murmuring prayers every time the aircraft hit a patch of light chop. "Just a little unstable air," Chloe had told him earlier, her voice even and calm. "The wings are designed to flex up to 26 feet. We're perfectly safe," Arthur had nodded, but his knuckles remained white. Now, 4 hours into the flight, the cabin was dark and quiet. The dinner service had been cleared away. Most of the 239 passengers were asleep, bathed in the soft blue glow of the cabin's mood lighting and the flickering screens of in-flight movies. Then, the floor dropped out from under them. It wasn't turbulence. It was a violent, catastrophic mechanical lurch. The nose of the massive airliner snapped downward at an impossible angle. The physics of the cabin inverted in a fraction of a second. Zero gravity took hold. Arthur's plastic cup of ginger ale levitated off his tray table, the golden liquid hanging suspended in the air like a localized rainstorm before violently smashing into the overhead bins. And then came the screams. A cacophony of absolute primal terror erupted as the Boeing entered a steep-powered dive. Unsecured service carts crashed down the aisles, smashing into seats. A laptop spiraled through the air like a deadly shuriken, shattering a plastic bulkhead. The oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling panels with a synchronized mechanical clatter, dangling like yellow spiders. Chloe's military instincts, dormant for months, snapped awake with the force of a defibrillator. Her heart rate, which should have spiked in panic, paradoxically slowed down. The tremor in her hands vanished. The world around her seemed to downshift into slow motion. "Assess the attitude," her brain commanded, defaulting to her training. "We are pitching down. Angle of attack is past 30 degrees. Airspeed is rapidly increasing." She looked out the window. The horizon line, usually a flat blue band in the distance, was gone. Instead, the dark expanse of the North Atlantic Ocean was rushing up to meet them, filling the small plexiglass oval. "Oh my God, we're dying, we're going down," Arthur shrieked, clawing frantically at his seatbelt, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it made him look like a cornered animal. Chloe grabbed his wrist, her grip like a steel vise. "Keep your belt on, Arthur. Do not unbuckle." She turned her attention to the front of the cabin. The aircraft was now accelerating in a terrifying plunge. The massive GE-90 engines were still roaring, driving them straight down into the sea. The G-forces shifted from weightlessness to a crushing negative gravity that pinned everyone against their shoulder harnesses. Through the chaos, Chloe's sharp eyes caught movement near the forward galley. Rachel Davis, the senior flight attendant, was pinned to the floor, her hands desperately gripping the leg of a passenger seat. Blood was smeared across Rachel's forehead, where she had impacted the bulkhead during the initial drop. Chloe knew commercial aviation protocols almost as well as fighter tactics. The pilot should have recovered the dive by now. Even an autopilot disconnect or a severe software glitch would have prompted an immediate manual override. But the plane wasn't leveling out. The dive was getting steeper. The structural groans of the Boeing 777 were growing louder, a terrifying metallic shrieking as the airframe was pushed far beyond its maximum operating velocity. They're dead or incapacitated. Chloe realized the cold, hard truth settling in her stomach. Nobody is flying this aircraft. She looked at the altitude screen on the seatback monitor in front of her. The numbers were blurring as they plummeted. 31,000 feet, 29,000 feet, 26,000 feet. They were dropping at nearly 10,000 feet per minute. In less than 3 minutes, Flight 409 would hit the Atlantic Ocean at over 500 miles per hour, disintegrating into a million pieces. Chloe unclipped her seatbelt. "What are you doing?" Arthur screamed over the deafening roar of the wind, sheer battering the fuselage. "You have to stay seated." "I'll be right back," Chloe said. Standing up in a plunging commercial airliner was like trying to scale a vertical cliff face with a hurricane blowing against your back. The angle of the floor was so steep that Chloe couldn't walk. She had to climb. She grabbed the headrest of seat 33J, hauling herself forward. Her muscles screamed in protest as the extreme G-forces tried to pin her to the ceiling. Passengers were sobbing, praying aloud, holding their loved ones. A woman in row 20 was blindly reaching for her dropped child, and Chloe used her leg to block the sliding toddler, wedging the boy safely between two seats until his mother could grab him. 22,000 feet. The air pressure inside the cabin was changing rapidly, popping her ears. The deafening roar of the slipstream outside was drowning out the screams inside. The aircraft was approaching the speed of sound, a threshold the 777 was never built to cross. If they hit Mach 1, the wings would literally rip off the fuselage. Chloe reached the front of economy, hauling herself into the business class cabin. She was bruised, her knuckles bleeding from gripping the plastic seat frame so hard, but her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated focus. She finally reached the forward galley. Rachel, the senior flight attendant, was still on the floor, frantically speaking into the interphone handset, screaming over the noise. "Captain Dorson, Dave, answer me, please answer me." Rachel dropped the phone, looking up at Chloe with tear-streaked, terrified eyes. "They aren't answering." "The door is locked. What's the emergency override code?" Chloe shouted, dropping to her knees beside the keypad, mounted next to the heavily reinforced cockpit door. Since 9/11, cockpit doors were designed to be impenetrable. A ballistic steel barrier stood between them and the controls. "It's a company protocol. You can't be here," Rachel cried out, her training momentarily fighting her panic. Chloe grabbed Rachel by the shoulders, her green eyes boring into the flight attendant's soul with the sheer authority of a combat commander. "I am Major Chloe Mitchell, United States Air Force. I fly fighter jets for a living. If you do not give me that code right now, every single person on this plane will be dead in 90 seconds. Give me the code." Rachel gasped, her eyes snapping to the keypad. 4829 pound. Chloe punched the buttons. A small red light blinked on the panel. "It's on a 30-con timer," Rachel yelled over the roaring airframe. "If they don't deny access from inside, it unlocks in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. In a fighter jet, 30 seconds was an eternity. At their current rate of descent, 30 seconds meant losing another 5,000 feet of altitude. The structural integrity of the plane was failing. Overhead panels were popping open, raining luggage down onto the passengers in first class. The terrifying mechanical automated voice from the cockpit was now loud enough to be heard through the steel door. "Overspeed, overspeed, pull up, Terran, pull up, come on, Chloe muttered, bracing her boots against the galley bulkhead, staring at the little red light. 15,000 feet. The heavy air of the lower atmosphere was hitting the plane now. The turbulence became vicious, shaking the aircraft like a toy in a dog's mouth. Chloe's vision blurred from the vibration. Green light. A loud metallic clack echoed from the heavy door. Chloe didn't hesitate. She grabbed the handle, twisted, and threw her entire body weight backward, hauling the heavy steel door open. The cockpit was a scene of absolute chaos. Warning lights bathed the cramped space in a strobe of flashing reds and ambers. The blaring horns and synthetic voice warnings were deafening. In the left seat, Captain Richard Dawson was slumped entirely forward. His massive frame collapsed heavily over the yoke, pinning the control column forward. His face was purple, saliva trailing from his mouth, massive coronary. He was dead or entirely unresponsive. In the right seat, First Officer David Bennett was unconscious, his head thrown back, blood streaming from a deep gash on his temple. The metal clipboard that had been resting on the glare shield had become a lethal projectile during the initial lurch, striking him square in the skull and knocking him out cold. "Help me," Chloe screamed at Rachel, squeezing into the microscopic space behind the captain's seat. Dawson's dead weight was holding the nose down. Chloe grabbed the captain by the collar of his uniform, planting her boots on the base of the seat. She pulled with every ounce of strength she had, her back muscles screaming as she fought the immense G-forces pressing the man forward. "Pull," Chloe roared. Rachel grabbed Dawson's belt, and together, with a desperate, adrenaline-fueled heave, they ripped the captain out of the left seat. Dawson's body tumbled backward into the narrow corridor, clearing the controls. Chloe immediately threw herself into the captain's seat. It was totally different from her F-35. The yoke was a massive, heavy steering wheel, not a sleek side stick. The digital displays were arranged differently, displaying a terrifying wall of red tape. She looked at the primary flight display. Airspeed 510 knots, red line was 330, pitch 42 degrees, nose down, altitude 9,400 feet. They had less than 45 seconds before impact. Chloe grabbed the heavy yoke with both hands. In a jet fighter, you could pull back on the stick, and the fly-by-wire system would snap the nose up in a heartbeat. But this was a Boeing 777. It weighed over 500,000 pounds. She pulled back on the yoke. It felt like it was set in concrete. The aerodynamic pressure on the elevators at the back of the tail was so immense at this speed that the hydraulic systems couldn't easily overcome the airflow. "Come on, you heavy," Chloe gritted her teeth, planting her feet on the rudder pedals for leverage. She pulled back with her arms, her shoulders, her entire core. The master caution alarm blared in her ears. Whoop, whoop, pull up, whoop, hitch, whoop, pull up, whoop, 7,000 feet, 6,000 feet. Through the cockpit windshield, all Chloe could see was the terrifying gray expanse of the churning Atlantic Ocean rushing up to swallow them whole. Every instinct told her to yank the yoke back as hard as she could, but her training intervened. If she pulled too hard, too fast, at this extreme speed, the wings would snap off the fuselage like dry twigs. She had to ease it out of the dive, a terrifying mathematical tightrope walk between hitting the water and ripping the aircraft apart in midair. "Please," Rachel sobbed behind her, clinging to the jump seat. Chloe's muscles burned as the heavy yoke began to move, millimeter by agonizing millimeter toward her chest. The nose of the giant aircraft groaned, fighting the physics of its own destruction as the dark water below filled the entire windshield, 5,000 feet. The radar altimeter screamed to life, its synthetic voice cutting through the cockpit's chaos with terrifying precision. 2,500 terrain. Terrain? Chloe's muscles were trembling. The yoke was fighting her with the strength of a freight train. Every instinct forged in the cockpit of her F-35 screamed at her to yank the controls into her lap, to force the nose up and away from the fast-approaching ocean. But her aeronautical engineering background, the cold, calculating part of her brain that made her a lethal combat pilot, held her back. If she pulled too aggressively at over 500 knots, the wings of the Boeing 777 would shear off at the route. She would turn a fatal dive into a catastrophic mid-air disintegration. She had to fly the line, the microscopic invisible boundary between structural failure and a watery grave. Suddenly, her eyes darted to the center console. The thrust levers, they were pushed entirely forward. When Captain Dawson had suffered his massive heart attack and slumped over the yoke, his dead weight hadn't just pushed the nose down. His arm had shoved the throttles to maximum continuous thrust. The massive GE-90 engines were literally driving them into the sea. "Throws!" Chloe shouted to herself. She took her right hand off the heavy yoke, trusting her left arm to hold the agonizing pressure for a split second. She slammed the heel of her hand against the throttle quadrant, ripping both levers all the way back to the idle stops. The roaring of the engines immediately spooled down, but the aerodynamic howl of the wind rushing over the fuselage at Mach 0.88 was still deafening. 3,000 feet. Pull up. Pull up one. Pull, 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 pull. Chloe grabbed the speed brake lever and yanked it backward. Outside on the wings, massive hydraulic panels deployed upward, biting into the supersonic airflow to kill their speed. The entire airframe shuddered violently. It felt as though they had just driven over a mile of rumble strips at 200 miles per hour. The overhead panels in the cockpit rattled so hard Chloe thought the glass instruments were going to shatter. Behind her, Rachel let out a choked gasp before the violent vibration and intense G-forces rendered her completely unconscious, her body slumping against the reinforced steel door, 2,000 feet. Through the reinforced windshield, Chloe could see the white caps on the Atlantic swells. The ocean was no longer an abstract horizon line. It was a physical textured surface rising up to smash them into oblivion. She could see the gray foam ripping off the crests of the waves. "Come on," Chloe roared, her voice tearing her throat as she pulled the yoke with everything she had. Her boots pressed so hard into the rudder pedals she thought the soles might snap. The G-forces shifted dramatically. As the nose finally began to pitch up, positive gravity slammed into the aircraft. In the cabin behind her, 239 passengers were crushed into their seats under the weight of 3 times their normal body mass. Luggage that had been floating in the aisles crashed straight down through the floor panels. 1,500 feet. 1,000. The nose was coming up, but their momentum was still carrying them downward. The aircraft was sinking in a massive parabolic arc. 500, 400. The dark water filled the bottom half of the windshield. The vibration was shaking Chloe's vision into a blurred double image. The yoke was pressed firmly into her chest. The structural groans of the Boeing were a symphony of tortured metal, the titanium wing boxes screaming under the impossible load. 300 to 100, Chloe braced for the impact. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, waiting for the catastrophic wall of water to shatter the glass and tear the plane apart. 50, 40, 30. The automated voice stopped. The violent sinking sensation transformed into a terrifying, heavy upward float. Chloe opened her eyes. The nose of the Boeing 777 sliced through the horizon line, pointing up toward the dark, starlit sky. The altimeter had bottomed out at exactly 86 feet above the cresting waves. They were climbing. Chloe exhaled a breath she felt like she had been holding for an hour. She eased the pressure off the yoke, letting the aircraft stabilize at a gentle 10 degrees pitch-up. The airspeed was bleeding off rapidly now, dropping past 300 knots. She gently nudged the throttles forward, just enough to maintain a safe climbing speed, her hands moving with the smooth, deliberate grace of a seasoned aviator. "Oh my God!" A weak voice groaned from the right seat. First Officer David Bennett was blinking his eyes open. A thick trail of blood ran down the side of his face from the deep laceration on his temple. He looked at the instrument panel, then out the window at the stars, and finally his gaze slowly turned to the stranger sitting in his captain's seat. Who are you?" David slurred, his hands weakly, reaching out as if trying to grasp reality. "Where's Richard? Why are we at 3,000 feet? First Officer Bennett, my name is Major Chloe Mitchell," she said, her voice dropping back into the calm, authoritative cadence of an Air Force flight lead. "Captain Dawson suffered a severe medical emergency. The aircraft entered an extreme overspeed dive. I've recovered the aircraft, but we need to assess our structural integrity right now." "I need you with me, David. Can you focus?" David shook his head, wincing in pain, but the ingrained discipline of thousands of flight hours began to override his concussion. Yeah, I'm here. I've got it." Before David could fully process the nightmare they had just escaped, a blaring rhythmic bell echoed through the cockpit. A bright red handle illuminated on the center console. Fire anger. Chloe's eyes snapped the engine instruments. The extreme aerodynamic stress and supersonic airflow had caused the right engine's compressor section to catastrophically stall and shred itself. Fuel was pouring into a destroyed turbine, and now it was ablaze. "Engine 2 is on fire," Chloe stated, her voice ice-cold, running the memory items. "Thrust lever 2, confirm." David, blinking away the blood, leaned over. "Confirmed. Thrust lever 2 idle." Chloe snapped it back. "Fuel control switch 2 cut off." She flipped the heavy switch, starving the burning engine of aviation fuel. "Engine fire. Switch 2, pull." David reached up, grabbing the glowing red handle and pulling it out. Pulled. "Rotate to the stop and hold for 1 second." Chloe twisted the handle, discharging the Halon fire extinguisher bottles directly into the burning engine. They waited 10 agonizing seconds, watching the temperature gauges. Slowly, the red fire warning light extinguished, the bell silenced. Fire is out. David breathed, sinking back into his seat. Chloe looked at the primary flight display. They were flying a massive overweight airliner, heavily damaged from an overspeed event, operating on a single engine in the dead of night, somewhere over the freezing Atlantic. "All right, David," Chloe said, reaching for the radio headset hanging beside the captain's window. "Let's find us a runway." The headset felt unfamiliar over Chloe's ears, lacking the tactical weight of her military helmet, but the microphone rested comfortably against her lips. She tuned the radio to the emergency guard frequency, 121.5. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Heavy Boeing Flight 409. We have experienced a severe loss of altitude. Captain is incapacitated. Right engine is destroyed and secured. We are declaring an emergency and require immediate vectors to the nearest suitable tarmac." Static hissed in her ears for a moment before a crisp, urgent Canadian accent broke through. "Flight 409, this is Montan Center. We have you on radar. You dropped off our screens for 3 minutes. We thought we lost you. State your souls on board and fuel remaining. We have 239 souls on board. Fuel is 60,000 pounds. I have a concussed first officer, and I am a military pilot acting as captain. We need a long runway. Montan in the Air Traffic Control Center, hundreds of miles away." Supervisor Brian Higgins stared at his radar scope in absolute disbelief. The data tag for Flight 409 had shown a descent rate that usually only meant one thing, a hull loss in the ocean. Yet here they were flying at 10,000 feet, limp but alive. "Flight 409, roger your mayday. Turn left heading 270. I am vectoring you to Halifax Stanfield International. Runway 23 is 10,000 feet long and waiting for you. Emergency services are already rolling, heading 270. Flight 409, Chloe replied, banking the crippled airliner. The yoke was terrifyingly stiff. The asymmetric thrust from having only the left engine running meant she had to keep heavy pressure on the right rudder pedal just to fly straight. Her leg was already cramping. Behind her, Rachel had regained consciousness. She was sobbing quietly, looking down at the lifeless body of Captain Dawson in the narrow corridor. "Rachel," Chloe called out over her shoulder, her tone gentle but firm, "I need you to go back into the cabin, check for severe injuries. Secure the cabin for an emergency landing and prep the passengers for a potential evacuation. Can you do that for me?" Rachel wiped her eyes, her professionalism fighting through the shock. Yes, Captain. I'm not a captain, Rachel. I'm just Chloe. Now go." The next 45 minutes were a grueling test of endurance. Without the autopilot, which had entirely locked out due to the conflicting data from the damaged PTO tubes, Chloe had to hand-fly the crippled 777 through the night air. David, though heavily concussed, managed the radios and ran the single-engine landing checklists, his hands shaking as he flipped the overhead switches. As they approached the coast of Nova Scotia, the glow of Halifax emerged from the darkness like a beacon of absolute salvation. "Flight 409, Montan Center. You are cleared for the ILS approach runway 23. The winds are 090 at 15 knots. You are cleared to land. Cleared to land runway 23. Flight 409. David croaked into the mic. "All right, David. Drop the gear," Chloe commanded. David pulled the heavy lever. The floor shuddered as the massive landing gear dropped into the slipstream and locked into place with 3 green lights on the panel. "Flaps 20, Chloe said. David moved the flap lever, but an amber caution light illuminated. "Flap asymmetry," David warned, his voice tight. "The overspeed damaged the tracks. We only have flaps 15. We're going to be coming in hot." "Understood." Adjusting reference speed, Chloe ran the math in her head. A heavier plane, less drag from the flaps, and only one engine to provide reverse thrust. It was going to take every inch of that 10,000 feet runway to stop. The runway lights of Halifax Stanfield lined up in the windshield, 2 brilliant rows of white diamonds cutting through the darkness. Flashing red and blue lights from dozens of fire trucks and ambulances lined the taxiways waiting for them. Chloe gripped the yoke, her eyes darting between the airspeed indicator and the runway threshold. They were coming in fast, over 160 knots. The ground rush was intense in the dark. 50. The automated voice called out. 40. 30. Chloe pulled back gently, flaring the massive aircraft. 20. 10. The main landing gear slammed onto the asphalt with a bone-jarring crack. The entire fuselage shuddered. Speed brakes up, Chloe shouted. Reverse thrust on 1. Max manual braking. Chloe stood on the brake pedals. The anti-skid system kicked in, vibrating the floor violently as the massive carbon brakes clamped down on wheels, spinning at nearly 200 miles per hour. The singular roar of the left engine, going into reverse thrust, pulled the nose of the plane hard to the left. Chloe fought it with the rudder, keeping the nose wheel pinned to the center line. The end of the runway was approaching fast. The red edge lights loomed closer and closer. Come on, stop. Stop, stop. Chloe prayed silently, her legs trembling under the immense pressure she was applying to the brakes. The speed bled away. 100 knots, 80 knots, 50. With less than 400 feet of pavement remaining, the massive Boeing 777 finally shuddered to a complete glorious halt. Total silence fell over the cockpit, save for the rhythmic spooling down of the single surviving engine and the distant wail of approaching fire engine sirens. David slumped forward into his harness, tears finally streaming through the dried blood on his face. He looked at Chloe, his chest heaving. You saved us. You saved everyone." Chloe let go of the yoke. Her hands, which had been perfectly steady for the last hour, immediately began to tremble with that familiar violent shake. She looked at her palms, then out the window, at the flashing emergency lights surrounding the aircraft. "No, David," Chloe whispered, unbuckling her harness and standing up, the adrenaline finally leaving her body in a crushing wave of exhaustion. "We saved each other." As the emergency doors opened in the cabin and the inflatable slides deployed, Chloe didn't wait for the rescue crews to reach the cockpit. She slipped out of the captain's seat, pulled her gray hoodie back over her messy bun, and walked quietly to the rear of the plane. By the time the authorities boarded to find the hero who had miraculously pulled Flight 409 from the jaws of the Atlantic, Major Chloe Mitchell was already sliding down the aft chute, disappearing silently into the cold Canadian night, ready to go back to being a ghost. If this incredible true story of Major Chloe Mitchell's heroism kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves aviation thrillers, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable, pulse-pounding true stories of survival and bravery. Drop a comment below. Would you have known what to do in row 34? See you in the next video.